Då ska vi få lyssna till någonting som heter En kock utan mage. Vi ska börja med en liten introduktionsfilm. Så kan ni köra på den.
In around 2004, my wife came across an application essentially for a cooking-themed reality show. I was selected as one of the 10 competitors to compete on that reality show, but I wasn't feeling 100%. Things like difficulty swallowing or, digestion issues. But a lot of the things that were kind of bothering me during that time, every one of those symptoms I could very easily chalk off to stress. I came back home, came to the regional hospital. They, of course, did this battery of tests and looked at my stats and said, hang on a second, this guy has got to be bleeding internally. She had the sense to run an endoscopy. Sure enough, they found a tumor right at that GI junction. We got the phone call from the GI doctor, and he's like, so yeah, it is cancer, and it's right there at your GI junction, and it was the day before my 33rd birthday. We were referred to an Atlanta area oncologist, and he recommended me to an institution in Houston. The doctor said to me, well, I'd say you have about a 10% chance of surviving this thing, which I was stage 3B, stage 4 being the worst that there is. In that moment, I thought, okay, 10%. Then I looked at the wall that was just over his shoulder, and I thought, well, that wall is 90% wall and 10% door. Rather than focusing on the 90% chance that I'm not going to make it, I'm going to focus on that 10% door. It wouldn't say 10% if somebody hadn't made it through that door. They had removed the top half of my stomach and about 50% or the lower half of my esophagus. I was prescribed a pretty intense regimen of combined chemo and radiation. Post chemo and radiation, we found that I had developed a leak between my half stomach and half esophagus, which they ended up having to go in and remove all of my stomach and all of my esophagus. I've had 15 plus surgeries. I think I kind of stopped counting at 15. I like to think of my cancer or my cancer experience as my rocket fuel to really accomplish things in life. Being a chef, you always want to think about things like flavor and presentation and how mouthfeel. You don't want to think too much about the nutrition side of things. I had to really slow down, pay attention to that connection between what I eat and how I feel. The other control in this whole experience is exercise. So a friend of mine recommended to me that I try pickleball. I finally gave it a try and absolutely fell in love with it. By fueling this engine correctly, eating a lot of high protein foods, really being mindful of what I'm eating, that combination of diet and exercise, I have more energy than most of my peers. There is this old adage that you never trust a skinny chef, and I might be skinny as hell, but I think I'm doing pretty good. If I can help somebody with just that little bit of their success story, I feel like I've succeeded.
Så, då går vi på engelska, så hoppas ni hänger med på det. Så welcome up on stage, Hans Rueffert, the chef without a stomach.
Thank you.
Let's do like that.
Thank you so much. I can talk about food the entire day. So watch the time. If I go too long, just shut me up. And I think lunchtime will also be a good time for us to stop. So I number one, Eva, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for allowing me to speak English, because I did maybe 2 weeks of Duolingo in Swedish, and I think this would be a terrible presentation for me to try. But I wanted to really start, even though there is a language barrier, I feel like I know everybody in this room. I know this energy, I know this heartache, I know the power of this diagnosis, and listening to the story about Gabriel, really also get a little emotional thinking about how many patients that I've had this rare opportunity to briefly meet. And sometimes it's the end of their story, sometimes it's the beginning of their journey, but I feel very honored to be in this family. And I think about 9/11, right? September 11th, 2001. It was this moment that we can all remember where the planes hit the towers in New York. And before we even understood what was happening, if you watch the video, There are people running as fast as they can away from the emergency, and then you see a group like this running to the emergency. How can I help? What can I do? There's no thought about their personal comfort or safety, or their first priority is how can I help someone else? And that's us. That's this group. That is this family of people. And I think sometimes we don't know that we are those people until we have that emergency. And so for so many of us, that diagnosis is our personal 9/11. It's our personal Berlin Wall. Right? How do we go over it, around it, under it? My father escaped from East Germany. He was on the east and had to escape, and I would not be here if he didn't have that sense of looking at a wall not as a stop, but as a what now? Do I go through it, around it, over it? But knowing that this is something that we have to get on the other side of. So I will, of course, talk about food, but I just wanted to take a moment and thank everybody in this room. It's a Wednesday. It is, I don't know if this is considered a beautiful day in Stockholm. I think yesterday was a little nicer. But there are 1,000 better things you could be doing with your time, and you chose to be here in this room to look at this emergency with a sense of humanity, with a sense of urgency, and with a sense of hope that we can make a difference. In July, as the video is a few years old, this July it will be 20 years from my original diagnosis. And they said that I would probably not make it until the age of 35. And this year I turned 53, which is dyslexic 35. And I'm incredibly proud that I'm still here to make what small difference that I can, but I'm also very much aware that all of our stories end in obituary. I don't know if you know that word, right? So it's the small paragraph in the newspaper that describes our life. That is the truth for all of us. Whether we're healthy, whether we're sick, none of us know how much time we have left in our hourglass. But the moment we become aware of that hourglass, I think it's an opportunity to look at life in a completely different way. It makes you appreciate really the beautiful day that we had yesterday was magical. And I think too often as humans, we focus on the things we can't do, the things we used to be able to do, instead of what today has. So I look at food in that same light, that if today was my last meal, would I be proud of what was on my plate? Now, I don't mean Michelin star, expensive. I mean a handful of figs from my fig tree in my backyard, a slice of good Jarlsberg cheese, maybe. Something. Not only what's on the plate, but who's across the table. That experience is such a part of our collective human experience. And I think too often, especially when we're talking about a digestive cancer, yes, we have to think about protein and fiber and all of those things, but sometimes we forget that food is really the thing that can be a healing, transformative part, not just in the calories and the scientific breakdown of the food, but of that experience of sharing a meal with someone, embracing and celebrating what's on the plate. So this is a digestive cancer conference, and so I do have to really talk about food in its non-sexy way. Again, as a former chef, I mean, I guess once a chef, always a chef. But in a restaurant, the focus really is on fat and mouthfeel and presentation. And I think all of those things are still very important. But I really had to change my focus to nutrition, which I will tell you was a little bit depressing for me, because I was on, again, food television and was a little bit celebrated in my life for that. And so I felt like I was a little bit smart in nutrition, but really I didn't know anything. I didn't understand the importance of blood sugar, that, again, even for someone with a normal digestive tract, blood sugar can affect our energy, our mental focus, it can affect our mood, and we don't think about that. And also, there's a natural delay with, again, normal stomach people. If you eat something that is fat or sugary or heavy, you might not feel the consequences, the effects of that, until maybe 6 or 8 hours later. So then you might have a coffee 6 hours later, and then you feel bad, and so you think, oh, it was the coffee. But the truth was, maybe it was what you had for breakfast, or maybe it's what you had for lunch. And so there's a little bit of a timing disconnect between what we eat and how we feel. Now, I have no esophagus, I have no stomach, I have no gallbladder, I'm missing ribs, I'm missing a collarbone. There's very little inside. I imagine if you open me up, it's like an empty cabinet, right? One can of soup and maybe some crackers.
Can you taste the food?
Absolutely, yeah, and I can still chew and swallow, but I don't have the benefit of stomach acid, and so I can put anything in it that I want, but the challenge is prioritizing foods that are easy to digest.
But I wonder, do you feel if it's sweet or salty?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so all of this is the same. Now, I do not feel hunger, which is strange. Again, my whole life has been connected with food, so I feel hunger now as a whole body blood sugar experience. I normally start to lose a little feeling in my face and my nose. I start to lose feeling in my fingertips. I get sometimes a little shaky. So I feel hunger as more of again, a whole body experience, not some, annoying noise in this area, because this area is, I don't know what's there. So I had a very hard time adjusting to this new digestive tract until I had a dietitian, someone who studies nutrition, tell me that to really think of this as an engine. And before my cancer, maybe I was a diesel, maybe I was a turbo diesel. But now that engine has been replaced with an electric hybrid. So if I'm still trying to put diesel into this machine, but now it's an electric hybrid, maybe I might get a few miles, but I'm not getting efficient miles. I'm not getting the horsepower that I should. And so that for me was a moment of a paradigm shift, right? Where I had to really think about, I personally am responsible for how I feel every day. I can blame when I was a child, yes, maybe I had to eat my Brussels sprouts or my liver, whatever was on the plate. Yeah, my father would say, you must eat it. But now as an adult, no one is forcing me to eat anything. So each day I have the power to really decide, do I want to eat foods that are fresh and vibrant and healthy, which immediately make me feel fresh and vibrant and healthy, or do I want to eat foods that are heavy and greasy and fatty, which make me feel heavy and greasy and fatty? That is our power. That's our responsibility to ourselves. And if you are a parent or if you are the caregiver, that's your responsibility to stay healthy so that you can take care of that person. I think at the beginning, this concept or that idea, again, can be a little overwhelming because we think of nutrition as something that is prescribed to us or that somebody, but the reality is there are very few things in this experience that we can control. I cannot control my DNA. I cannot control my family's, genetic or my cancer history on my grandmother or my sister had breast cancer. None of that I can control, but I can control what fuel I'm putting in this engine. I can control a little bit of my exercise, within reason. And mental health, and that's, I think, a conversation, at least in the United States, that has been a long time, nobody wanted to discuss mental health. But the reality is all of those things are combined. And so once we, as patients or as caregivers, once we embrace the fact that our part in this journey, again, I don't really have a strong opinion on which chemotherapy or which radiation. 20 years ago, there were no options. I had two options, do it or don't do it. Now, thankfully, 20 years later, we have several options for esophageal cancer, for gastric cancer, for pancreatic cancer. There are people in this room that statistically, myself included, really shouldn't be here. But the advances in science, in our knowledge of the disease, in the genetic makeup of the disease, has come so far that we are understanding it better. But our responsibility is then to keep this machine, just like if you bought a Porsche, it's not just about putting gas in there. You have to change the oil, you have to rotate the tires. It is a high performance machine. And I think there is so much opportunity for us to make a positive impact that, to me, that's exciting. It can be overwhelming, and there's also a lot of misinformation, superfoods and things. I mean, every day it seems like there's a new superfood. But I want to talk about some of those things, but I want to do it in a way that we can be interactive. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. Even this morning at breakfast at the hotel, the man working it saw me take chia seeds, and I mix chia seeds into my glass of water every day before I have breakfast. That helps stabilize my blood sugar. Now, I'm not a diabetic, but my pancreas does what it thinks is the right job, but honestly, usually I have too much insulin because I have no stomach, I have no esophagus. Anything that I swallow, my pancreas is overreacting. So there are small little tips like drinking a little bit of cornstarch or chia seeds or flax seeds that basically act almost like a sponge to kind of help absorb some of these things. And they're easy little hack, I guess is the term we use. The unfortunate side of that is on TikTok, there are a lot of people that are like, oh, you can drink sand every morning, or don't drink sand. But there are so many of these people trying to get your attention that sometimes it's hard to really know what is an honest way to affect that. Many of us in the room have a continuous blood glucose monitor. I now have a little patch that I change every 10 days that gives me real feedback, almost instant. Like every 4 minutes, I get feedback to see what is happening with my blood sugar. And you can feel and see in real time what I ate, how does it affect my heart rate. If you have too much insulin in your system, the body pulls moisture, pulls water out of your brain, out of your blood, in an attempt to cleanse out, to basically push out the excess insulin. And so you can sometimes feel like you're having a heart attack. Your heartbeat goes up because your blood is actually getting thicker. You can get a headache. There are times that you almost lose your short-term memory. All of that is related to blood sugar, and all of that can be the difference between me using stevia in my coffee or using sugar in my coffee. Something as simple as that. Or I noticed even here in the lobby, there's little candy things. And I think, yeah, I can no problem eating a candy. That one decision to eat that one candy can absolutely change my day for the negative if I haven't had enough other foods to offset that sugar. But again, that can be an overwhelming idea, but it can also be an overwhelmingly positive idea that I get to decide every day. And I have to tell you, so many times I make myself sick to make other people happy. Because food is such a human experience where you go to someone's house and they take the time and they make a meal, and that's love, right? They want to feed you, and that's love. So if I now say I make my portion at like a child's portion, if I don't take a second portion, then, oh, you don't like it, or, oh, I'm sorry, I made the wrong thing. And so I'm trying to make them feel better, and so okay, fine, I'll eat a little more, and then, I go off a cliff. So I'm learning to set my own boundaries, to be able to say, you know what, this was delicious, but it's perfect. I can't eat anymore. I have the excuse of saying, I have no place to put it because I really have no place to put it. And I've learned with dessert, like the sugary thing, that is such a part of the meal is not over until we've had that dessert. And especially when I'm traveling in Europe, I mean, you guys have really some of the best desserts on the planet. But what is the best bite of dessert? It's the first bite. And then we call it the law of diminishing returns, meaning the first bite is amazing, the second bite is pretty good, the 10th bite, you're thinking, what am I doing? And the 15th bite, the final bite, you're loosening your belt and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm an idiot. So I had to really learn that if someone orders dessert for the table, I have one bite and then I'm done. I take the fork and physically put it away. That way I have the experience without the discomfort of crashing. And even though, again, I have a very strange GI, very strange digestion, the same is true for really anybody in this room that eats food, which I think is most of us. Every day you have the decision to decide how do I want to make the rest of the day feel? Some of you might remember, or at least in the United States, I think culturally it's a little different here. I just learned last night that taking food home is not exactly polite here. But in the US, especially in the 1990s, there was a very popular trend. This was for weight loss, that they would order a meal, and in the US sometimes it's too much food. And so as soon as the plate arrives, they would ask for a box, a doggy bag, a to-go box. And then they would take half of the food, put it in a box, remove it, and that way they're sort of forcing themselves that they don't overeat. We were having a conversation at dinner last night. I have from the hospital a card that says I can order from the child's menu. So if I want to order a child's portion, I can. But most restaurants don't know what that is. Or they bring me the children's menu, which is hamburgers and hot dogs and French fries, which I don't want. Or they think I'm just trying to save money. So really, I think I've only used that card in 20 years one time. And my strategy then is that I order a normal meal, I take half of it home. The next morning I might fry an egg on top, and that becomes breakfast. So really having to take full control of what I eat and how I eat. Now, right now, the world seems very focused on protein. That's protein. We need more protein. That is true, but it is just one part of the equation. And there is this sort of misconception that protein equals meat. And that is true. There is protein in animal muscle, in all animal tissue. But it is a lot of work for the body to be able to use that protein. And as we know, there's so many instances of increased risk of gastric cancer, of colorectal cancer. The more animal meat you eat, the more meat you eat, the higher the risk of a cancer, of the digestive cancer. So it's things like beans, it's things like quinoa, and I can talk about quinoa all day long. It's things like brown rice. But what happens is when somebody gets inspired, like they hear a talk like mine, and so they think, okay, today I'm going to start eating healthy. And so they think, okay, no meat, or I'm going to switch from 80% meat on my plate to maybe 20% meat on my plate. And so they do that for 2 or 3 days, and they have bathroom problems, they have cramping, and they immediately say, oh, I tried it, it doesn't work. But in truth, anytime you make a change to your diet, you will have 2 or 3 days of, let's just say, bathroom drama sometimes. And that is totally normal. We are learning so much about the population of our gut biome, that our entire immune system lives in our gut. We're just like a bus carrying around, there's 80,000 bacteria for every one human cell. So there's more bacteria in our bodies than there are human cells, and we are basically caregivers for that bacteria. So if your normal diet is hamburgers and French fries and pizzas and greasy things, you have built this population of bacteria that wants that. And so when you're craving the greasy food, I give you permission to don't feel guilty. It's not your fault, it's their fault. But as you slowly start to transition to, I hate to be the food police, but what you can define as a healthier diet, more plants, more fiber, more plant-based protein, as you make that transition, you really have like a mass evacuation, it's almost like a genocide, where those bacteria that you have grown for maybe years, maybe decades, die. They start to die. And in its place, you are replacing them with the healthier bacteria. But that transition period can really be a struggle, especially if you're a patient going through chemo or radiation, especially if you're on antibiotics. You can absolutely destroy everything that you've worked so hard to build this population. 1 week of antibiotics can totally ruin all of that. And so it really becomes your full-time mission to encourage and introduce those healthy bacteria. How do we do that? We do that with foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, kefir. I've heard about the fermented herring that you have, I can't remember the name. I'm not saying that's a good idea. I don't know. I haven't tried it. And it's I've heard that that it can be a little. I love herring, but I don't know if I'm quite ready for that. But the beautiful thing about fermented foods, it's almost like you are hiring someone else to do the digestion for you. So let's look at even lactose, for example. Many people with digestive cancers become lactose intolerant. Lactose is what we call a disaccharide. It's a sugar that basically is of two molecules. A healthy body will create lactase, which is an enzyme which breaks those two molecules apart and makes it easy for us to digest. But as we get older, our body starts, it stops making the lactase, and so eating dairy is can be difficult, and again, especially for people that have gone through treatment. But if you introduce foods like yogurt, aged cheeses, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, those bacteria will work on breaking those for you. So you're outsourcing. You're actually hiring these bacteria to do some of that heavy work for you. Now, that's a beautiful thing, and it makes digestion eventually much easier, but that transition period, you really will have some difficult days. I mean, I hate to say shitty days, but you might have some shitty days. So we're all adults. But my wife used to travel with me to come to some of these, and she always says, "Oh my God, you're talking about bathroom again." But the truth is, every great meal you've ever had, you flush down the toilet, and I feel like we have to be able to discuss that, because if your guts are not happy, no one is happy. If you're always looking, where is the restroom, it's a different kind of life, which I don't recommend for anybody. But again, the great thing is you can, to a degree, you can control that. So now, when I say foods like yogurt, you really have to be your own personal police. Now, I don't know here in Sweden, but in the US, the product can contain yogurt, but have no health benefits. It can be sugar. It can be, maybe at one point it was yogurt and then they cooked it or they dried it. And so what you're looking for are these foods that contain live, active cultures. And it's very clearly labeled on the foods that do. Usually it'll have a little symbol saying contains live and active cultures. And if you take only 2 or 3 things away from my conversation today, try to incorporate more of those live fermented foods. Even with foods like sauerkraut, it's cheap, it's easy to make, 3 ingredients: salt, cabbage, water, and then maybe thyme, right? It takes time to ferment it. But if you build this beautiful colony of bacteria and then you cook it, yes, that cabbage still tastes good, it's a little easier to digest, but you've just killed everything that you're trying to do. So not only knowing what foods have those live bacteria, but also knowing when to incorporate them into your meal. So if you're using sauerkraut, even if you want it warm, that's fine. But if you bring it above, say, 85 degrees Celsius, maybe 90 degrees Celsius, you have a real chance of dramatically killing the population that you're so desperate to try and get in. So those are the kind of foods that you focus on. There's another term, we call those probiotics, right? Now, in the US, there's sort of a new term. It's called prebiotics. And it really is just a fancy word for fiber. But it allows many of these food marketing companies now to sell you something that is essentially fiber. But the probiotics, you can eat them, but for them to really take root and establish, they need fiber. And we're talking about things like, again, brown rice, millet, which some people say, well, that's bird food. I don't know too many birds with cancer. So if the birds are eating it and they're doing healthy, I'm totally fine with that. But quinoa really is the one that I want to focus on, because our body creates certain amino acids that are essential to building healthy cells. But there are some amino acids that we cannot produce. And quinoa is a very rare plant in that it is a complete protein, meaning it contains all 7 of the amino acids that our body needs. So I tell people, if you have a pet cat, some people spend more time reading the ingredients of the cat food and worried about what Fluffy is going to be eating for dinner every day for the rest of its life than they do thinking about what they will eat. But if you have pet humans, and I have 3 children, so if you had to pick one food to feed your pet humans for the rest of time, quinoa is it. It's not only is it full of protein, not only is it full of fiber, it has all of those amino acids that our body needs for healthy life. Now, that is a very boring life to eat quinoa for the rest of your life, but it is such a versatile food. You can incorporate it into your muesli. You can incorporate it into instead of rice or with rice. It's such an easy food to make. It's fast to prepare. And so when I'm looking to make a meal, I try to have already prepared in the refrigerator items like cooked quinoa, cooked brown rice, cooked millet, and not giant things of it, but small amounts. And so when it's time for me to eat, I can take a spoonful of quinoa, a spoonful of these prepared items, and assemble a meal in a short time. So if you're a patient, sometimes we have these very narrow windows of opportunity when we feel strong enough, we feel good enough to have a meal. But now if I have to wait 60 minutes for the brown rice to cook, or if I have to wait 20 minutes for the quinoa to cook, sometimes you miss that window of opportunity. So even if you're living by yourself, I would try to cook maybe 2 times what you need, because all of these things, they can be frozen. Sometimes when you freeze it might change the consistency a little bit, but all of them can last in the refrigerator 4 or 5 days. And so having a few of those items ready, semi-prepared, it's so easy then to make a quick soup, a quick a grain salad with some beans and spinach and quinoa. If we don't have those things on the ready, it's sometimes easier to go to the drive-thru. Or I don't know, I guess I haven't seen a McDonald's here in Sweden, but I assume they're here. We fall into this trap of, I don't have time to eat healthy food. Or we go to restaurants that specialize in fancy food or healthy food, and the price is 6 times what it is. But in truth, these foods I'm talking about are so inexpensive. You can make an incredibly healthy meal of beans and fresh spinach and beets and carrots and quinoa for under $1, per person. So 10 krona. I mean, right? It's so inexpensive, and as I mentioned to someone outside, it is our culture to have 3 big meals a day, and I love the fika. I think that's a great thing. I highly encourage the fika, although sometimes it's a little sugary. But if you have these things prepared in the refrigerator, it's so easy then to go and make a small meal. And I would even, as a psychological trick, don't get a big plate. Get a small plate. Get a small bowl. It's something more satisfying about finishing a smaller bowl, than to have a large bowl and then feel miserable. So there are so many little mind games you can play with yourself, which sounds like you're sort of cheating or tricking, but it becomes a lifestyle, it becomes a priority. But most importantly, it is incredibly easy to do. So I do a nutritional video series called the Gesundheit Kitchen, Gesundheit being the German word for health, and it is at gastriccancer.org, and they're very short videos, and they are in English, but I think for anybody that has an interest in nutrition, I would invite you to visit gastriccancer.org. The Gesundheit Kitchen is also on YouTube. They're easy to digest. They're not difficult. I'm not wearing a chef's coat. I'm not trying to impress anybody with my culinary abilities. I'm trying to show people how inexpensive, how easy it is to enjoy a solid meal without the negative side effects. Now, I will also quickly add that there is no one magic food, maybe quinoa a little bit, but some people can't tolerate that. So it can be frustrating because everybody wants the perfect meal. There is no perfect meal. Going back to the engine analogy, we all have a different engine. And our engines are all slightly calibrated differently. So you might have to make a little bit of investment of time to to see what works for you. And then, of course, there are some people that simply don't like certain foods. And so if I'm talking about fish and you don't like fish, well, then you go to the next episode. Or you look for a way to substitute that out. But I hope that you look at food just slightly differently. Having met somebody with no stomach and no esophagus, I still am able to enjoy food. And I still also, you eat with your eyes first. I might have the most boring meal of grains and greens and beans, but I'm going to make sure it's beautiful so that I'm excited about eating it, not just 4 colors of brown. Even if I'm making a hummus, I'm going to go in my garden and get a little parsley or a little mint, and I'm going to put that on there just so that I'm still elevating that experience to something that I enjoy in my soul, not just in my gut. So with that, I'm going to kind of open for some questions or ideas. I don't have all the answers, but I'm always happy to have a conversation about food. Any thoughts, anybody?
Yeah, I actually mostly wanted to ask about your anatomy because I'm a medical student,
Yeah.
so this is very interesting. You said you have no stomach and no esophagus.
Correct.
Because I know if you remove the stomach, which they did with my dad because he had the same cancer as you had, then they like kind of take the small intestine and connect it to the esophagus. And if you remove the esophagus, you do like the stomach becomes the esophagus.
Right.
But you have neither.
Correct.
So you have like an esophagus made of small intestine?
Yes,
then?
so it's called a jejunal interposition, which the jejunum has the same contraction. It's called peristalsis.
Yes.
I don't know if it's the same. So much like the esophagus, it has this downward squeeze, but normally it's below the stomach squeezing into the intestines. So they moved it to where my esophagus was. So really, I have about 1 inch of my original esophagus. And so when I swallow, it's not as strong as the esophagus. So sometimes I really have to wait. I might be excited about eating, but it's not ready. So I have to kind of, it's a strange relationship. But so yes, it pushes it down straight into my intestines. Now they have, the procedure is called a Roux-en-Y because it looks like the letter Y.
It's like the gastric bypass.
Correct,
procedure.
similar.
Yeah.
So they have a sort of an extra loop. That way the digestive juices can come from the pancreas, bile can come down to join the food later. So again, I can swallow any of the trash that I want to, but with no stomach acid and with no benefit of, I can no longer absorb iron, B12, or calcium.
Yeah.
Because all of those are absorbed in the stomach.
Yeah.
So I have to do, in fact, when I come back to the United States, on Friday, I have a 4-hour iron infusion, and I do that probably 4 times a year because without the infusions, I can't do it. I have to do B12 injections, and then calcium is a bigger problem. Honestly, right now I have osteoporosis like a 90-year-old man, and no offense to any 90-year-old men here, and it's a really tough. There are medications that can stop you losing calcium, but there's not really great ways to get calcium back in. And so really I started doing the more exercise because that is a way for the body to really focus what limited resources I have to building stronger bones. So that became a part of it, part of that equation. But yeah, it is a very strange anatomy. But prior to my diagnosis, I had no idea that a human could live without a stomach. And so I love it when people say, how do you eat without a stomach? And I say, well, typically with a knife and fork.
Yeah.
But if it's soup, I might switch to a spoon. But I fully understand the question. It is a little bit of I think, a medical miracle that the human body is so desperate to live that we will, it's like a plane flying with no wings, but somehow I keep getting those miles. Yeah.
Hello. If you eat antibiotics for like a week, and if you eat properly afterwards, how long time would it take to restore that microbiome?
Listen, your question is perfect timing because I landed in Amsterdam 10 days ago for another conference and was diagnosed with pneumonia the same day, lung infection. And so I had 7 days of a pretty powerful antibiotic. and it made me incredibly sick. A lot of bathroom drama, a lot of nausea. It took me about 10 days. In fact, I almost had to cancel this trip because of that. But I was 7 days on the antibiotics, and it took about 10 days for my body. And that is also using probiotic supplements. Antibiotics are incredibly powerful, but they can also be incredibly destructive when you have such a unique anatomy.
Would you recommend taking probiotics at the same time?
Yes, but not at the exact same time. So usually you try to do like a 12-hour stagger. So if I do the antibiotics in the morning, then I do the probiotics in the afternoon or the evening. I think probiotics, there's still a lot we're learning. It's not about how many billions, every probiotic, they're always bragging. I'm curious whose job it is to count how many billions there are. But it's more about how many types there are, right? So you're looking for a probiotic that has 8, 10, 12, 20 different strains, because we're still learning a lot. We know that some of them are great, but we don't always know how or why or what the interaction's in. So I think in your normal regimen, I think taking a probiotic is as important as a multivitamin. But again, look not only for the billions, look for how many different strains that there are.
Is it very important to take it with milk, or can you take it with...
You can take it without, but I will say that the foods that have probiotics in them are more effective than the powdered one. You want them to say live and active, so sometimes you can find the refrigerated kinds might be a little better. But again, eating the foods like yogurt, kefir, ayran, all of those naturally fermented foods, you're going to get more bang for the buck. You're going to get more impact from those than you will the pill, but the pill's much better than nothing. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Could you repeat your homepage?
Oh, sure. It's gastriccancer.org. .org. And so I am with the Gastric Cancer Foundation, which when I was diagnosed, there was no gastric cancer specific organization. And I was lucky to meet a young man who was my age. And sadly, 4 years later, he passed. And, it is difficult to hear stories like Gabrielle's, to hear stories, again, the young man who started the Gastric Cancer Foundation. You meet them and then you lose them. But that is life. And I had a nurse one time. She was working in palliative care and in hospice. And I asked her, I said, look, so many patients that I meet, I lose. And it was really starting to weigh heavy on my mental health. And so I said, how do you do it? As a hospice nurse, you're meeting people at the end. How do you connect with these people for such a short time? And she said, look, imagine your best ever family vacation. Imagine it was the perfect weather. The family was no one was angry. The food was perfect. And I immediately had that image. She said, now that day will never happen again. There's no chance that day will ever happen again. So do you spend the rest of your life sad that day will never happen again? Or do you celebrate the fact that it happened? And I'm getting emotional saying that, because that was a change, that was a moment in time. And this nurse is sadly, she passed away maybe 1 year later. But I got to be a part of that person's story. I had a rare moment. The fact that all of us, I'm from Jasper, Georgia, my hometown is the size of this room. And the fact that I'm on the other side of the Atlantic in a room with people that are passionate about a disease, which is kind of a crazy thing. But in this moment, everything worked out where we have an intersection. And I think there's something to be celebrated there, right? I think that's something that I consider, none of us know what if we have it tomorrow. So the only thing we can do is celebrate today in the best way we can. And for the people that we've lost, we celebrate their stories. I mean, I didn't understand every word you said, but I felt every word that you said. And I'm proud to be here. I'm proud that all of you are here, and I'm proud that we had this rare opportunity to spend some time together.
Thank you. very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.